What's up, everybody? This is the next video in a series in which we break down the candidates for the Knicks head coach position. Last video, we talked about the pros and cons of Jason Kidd, and today we're going to analyze the pros and cons of a coach Knicks fans are very familiar with, Coach Mike Woodson. The last time the Knicks had any level of success was under Mike Woodson. The Knicks have been a pretty mediocre franchise for most of the past 20 years, but Woodson was the head coach of a New York Knicks team that managed to win 54 games, finish as the second seed in the East, and got to the second round of the playoffs. If Woodson gets hired again, Knicks fans will be hoping he can bring that same magic back. The pros of hiring Mike Woodson is that he's very experienced, he coached the Hawks through their rebuild, and he was relatively successful as the head coach of the New York Knicks. The cons are that he tends to run very isolation-heavy offense, and he often fails to make adjustments. The first pro we're going to talk about is Mike Woodson's success during his time coaching the Knicks. Mike Woodson had an overall 109-79 record in 2.5 seasons with New York. Woodson took over as the head coach after Mike D'Antoni was fired back in the 2011-2012 season. Under Mike Woodson, the Knicks had a very strong finish to the season, going 18-6. A huge part of the reason the Knicks were able to finish the year so strong was that Woodson was able to inspire the Knicks to play elite level defense. In fact, the Knicks ranked 5th in defensive efficiency that year, which is one of the rare times over the past couple of decades where the Knicks were a top 5 defense. Not only were the Knicks playing great defense, but Woodson also got the best out of Carmelo Anthony. A problem with D'Antoni was that he tried to turn Melo into something that he's not, which is a point forward. Melo isn't LeBron James. What Melo is an unstoppable scorer, especially out of the triple threat. Mike Woodson allowed Melo to play to his style of ball, which is isolation ball. As a result, Melo averaged 30 points per game in the month of April and won the Player of the Month award. Unfortunately, despite the hot finish to the season, the Knicks got easily dispatched in 5 games to the Miami Heat. Unfortunately, they were not only facing the team that would go on to win the title, but they were facing them with injuries to key role players like Iman Shumpert and Jeremy Lin. Next year, the Knicks would go on to have their best season under Woodson. That Knicks team won 54 games and secured the number 2 seed in the East. A huge part of that success was Mike Woodson's innovation. The Knicks were actually one of the first teams to utilize small ball, and it helped to make the Knicks the 3rd best offense in the league that year. Woodson took Melo away from his natural small forward position and used him as a small ball 4 while putting really good outside shooters around him on the court. The extra shooting gave Melo the spacing to operate in the high and low post, leading to him winning the scoring title and finishing 3rd in MVP voting. Unfortunately, the ending of that season was pretty disappointing. After finishing as the 2 seed, the Knicks should have at least got to the conference finals. They let the Celtics drag their first round series way longer than it should have. After starting the series 3-0, they let Boston take them to 6 games. Then they would go on to lose to the Pacers. A huge part of that was the Knicks being ravished by injuries. Unfortunately, that season was the high point of Woodson's tenure with the Knicks. In the 2013-14 season, the Knicks only won 37 games and finished as the 9th seed. The Knicks actually had a strong end to the season, going 16-7, but the horrible 21-38 record that they started off with was just too much to overcome. The Knicks suffered too many injuries to keep players. Chandler missed a huge portion of that year, JR had to recover from knee surgery, and Raymond Felton, a huge X factor, totally fell off a cliff. After that season, Woodson was fired. Mike Woodson had a pretty rough ending, but his 3 years with the Knicks was the most success that the Knicks have had since the 1990s. The next major pro of Mike Woodson is that he coached the Hawks through their rebuild in the mid-2000s. As of right now, the Hawks are rebuilding around all-star point guard Trae Young, but there was a point when the Hawks were consistently a playoff team in the East not too long ago. In fact, up until a few seasons ago, the Hawks had the 2nd largest active playoff streak in the NBA behind the Spurs, making the playoffs 10 straight years from 2008 to 2017. They never got to the finals, but they were consistently a good team with a core of Josh Smith, Joe Johnson, and Al Horford. When Mike Woodson inherited the team in the 04 to 05 season, they were an extremely young roster and they were one of the worst teams in the East. That first year, the Hawks finished the year with a miserable 13-69 record. While the Hawks were totally awful that year, Josh Smith and Josh Childress showed a lot of promise in their rookie seasons, both making the all-rookie second team. These young players emerged as key building blocks going forward. The Hawks would improve every season under Mike Woodson, eventually making the playoffs as an 8th seed in 2007. The young players on the Hawks showed tremendous growth, which helped the Hawks jump to a playoff seed. Joe Johnson made his second All-Star team, Josh Smith became one of the top young players, Josh Childress became one of the league's top 6 men, and Al Horford had a very solid rookie campaign. In just 4 seasons after Mike Woodson took the job, the Hawks had a young, exciting playoff team. After that season, the Hawks continued improving, winning 47 games the next year and 53 after that year, while getting to the second round of the playoffs. In 2010, the Hawks chose not to re-sign Coach Woodson. While Woodson never turned the Hawks into a true contender, he guided a young Hawks team through their rebuild and turned them from one of the league's bottom feeders to a consistent playoff team in the East. This is impressive considering that there are plenty of teams like the Suns and the Kings that have missed the playoffs for over a decade despite years of lottery picks. As of now, the Knicks are still a very young rebuilding team. The Knicks need a coach that's going to help the young guys like RJ Barrett and Mitchell Robinson to maximize their potential. Based on his years with Atlanta, Woodson appears to be someone who's capable of coaching the Knicks through a rebuild. The last pro I want to talk about with Woodson is experience. The Knicks need an experienced coach that knows what they're doing, and Woodson is a basketball lifer. After Woodson's 10-year playing career from 1981 to 91, he became an assistant NBA coach. Woodson was an assistant coach for 8 years, including being a part of the Detroit Pistons that won the title in 2004. As stated before, he coached the Hawks from 2004 to 2010 and the Knicks from 2012 to 2014. He's been an assistant coach for the Clippers under Doc Rivers ever since. All this to say that Mike Woodson is one of the most experienced coaches out there. Woodson would be a pretty solid hire as he's coaching the NBA for well over 20 seasons. At this point, we're going to start talking about cons. The first major con of Coach Woodson is his isolation-heavy offense. There was very little creativity with his offense. It usually just revolved around getting his star into his sweet spots and letting them do most of the scoring. On the Hawks, Woodson did this with Joe Johnson, and on the Knicks, he did this with Melo. This did lead to a great regular season offense. In 2013, the Knicks finished third in offensive efficiency, and the Hawks were also third in offensive efficiency in 2010. When you have a really good offensive star, it can lead to great offense. But the problem with this system is that it's just way too predictable. It's really hard to win a championship with an offense that just relies on one guy to do most of the creation. In the playoffs, when the defense is tougher, teams tend to load up on that star and make it as difficult as possible for them to score and play make. This is why when you have stars, ball movement is still very important. For all of Coach Woodson's success, his teams never even got past the second round, and running too much ISO ball was a huge part of it. ISO-heavy teams can make for great regular season teams, but in order to win a championship, the ball really needs to move. The last con I'm going to talk about with Woodson is his failure to make adjustments. Woodson is a good coach, but his failures to make adjustments or his choice to make the wrong adjustments was mind-boggling at times. A huge example of this was Woodson's refusal to change the Knicks' defensive schemes in 2014. Now, while the Knicks were great defensively in the 2011 to 2012 season, in the 2013 to 2014 season, the Knicks were one of the worst defensive teams in the league. Part of the reason why they were so bad was the switch-heavy defense Woodson ran. Switch defense actually isn't bad. The Warriors have been running a switch-heavy system for years, and they've always been a top 5 defense. But the Warriors have switchable defenders like Klay, Iguodala, and Draymond Green. The Knicks didn't have the personnel to run this system as Raymond Felton, Andrea Bargnani, and Stoudemire are all horrible defenders that cannot switch onto multiple positions. It also didn't help that Tyson Chandler missed a huge chunk of the season, but Woodson contributed to the Knicks' struggles on defense by continuing to use a system that wasn't going to work with the personnel on the team. A good coach makes these type of adjustments and the Knicks were continuously switching on everything and continuously getting burned. Another example of Woodson's poor adjustments was in their playoff series against the Pacers back in 2013. Even though the Knicks won 54 games utilizing small lineups, Woodson's brilliant idea in the playoffs against the Pacers was to go big by starting Kenyon Martin in Game 4 of the series. This strategy totally backfired. The Knicks were desperate for offense with J.R. Smith struggling. What Woodson really needed to do was to give Chris Copeland more minutes, but he left him on the bench way too often. The Knicks could have used Copeland's shooting and scoring on the floor. The Knicks were badly bit by the injury bug in that playoff series, but Frank Vogel easily outcoached Mike Woodson. So there you have it, Knicks fans. Those are the pros and cons of rehiring Coach Woodson. Now, I do think he's a good coach, and I do think he can get the Knicks through their rebuild, but I do question just how far a Woodson-led team can go with his ISO-heavy offense and inability to make the right adjustments. But tell me in the comments what you guys think. Should the Knicks bring back Woody? Don't forget to like and sub, and thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.